Winter had turned bitter by mid-January. Half-filled champagne flutes were still resting on the kitchen counter. A shadow was rarely cast upon them. The new millennium had rang out weeks ago, and it was as if it were still 1999 in the apartment. Nothing had changed. Their New Year's resolutions felt as hollow as the kiss they shared at midnight. Kimberly realized 2 years too late that what he really wanted was someone she didn't want to be, but she made the time and put in the effort to become that woman. And now, realizing what she's not, she may never get the chance to fully realize who she really is. Michael had just graduated from business school to appease his parents, but he had nowhere to go in life. All he had was his relationship with his girlfriend Kimberly, and even that was at risk of being pulled out from under him. He would miss her smell the most, how it brought him so much comfort over the years. He knew she deserved better, maybe they both did. It was her day off, and Kimberly had to get out of the apartment. Maybe heading back to her small hometown for the afternoon to tread the old snow-covered stomping grounds would clear her head. She walked past the shop window of an old thrift store she and her friends used to frequent during summer breaks from school, an era that felt like it belonged to a different life. Behind the scratched, wavy glass, she could see the glint of a fully restored early 20th century typewriter. It had gleaming keys and an intricate, delicate pattern of vines and roses etched into its metal body. Eager to get out of the cold and fall into a new distraction, she swung open the door and entered the toasty shop, scraping the mud and snow off of her boots on the welcome mat. The shop owner, an older man who seemed frazzled with odds and ends, bid her salutations and asks if she's looking for anything in particular. Kimberly sweeps her eyes over the selection, but swiftly returns her gaze to the typewriter.
Actually, I wanted to take a look at that typewriter. It's beautiful,
she says excitedly. The shop owner at first appears perplexed, then suddenly remembers.
Oh yeah, I forgot all about that thing. It's been sitting there for years. Surprised it's not caked in dust up there.
He tosses the knickknacks in his hands onto the front counter and curls around it to retrieve the typewriter from the window.
Yep, came across this at an estate sale a few years back. I think it's just missing the ink ribbon. Shouldn't be too hard to find one, though.
He heaves the typewriter onto the counter, forgetting how heavy it was.
Wow, it looks like it's in perfect condition. I can't believe no one's bought this yet.
Well, it's very decorative, I guess.
The owner shrugs.
Kind of creepy looking. Smells like cigar smoke, too, no matter what I do to it. And who uses a typewriter anymore, right?
I guess you're right.
Kimberly chuckles in agreement. But there's something about it that calls to her. The keys, rimmed with beautiful gold-colored trim, beg to be touched and depressed. The long, bent, silvery carriage return lever glinted at her in the soft lighting of the thrift shop. The knobs on either side of the machine featured an interesting design, like ancient symbols she's seen in history books. She had to have it. She needed the release of owning something new that was just hers. Something remarkable she could maintain for her own sanity. A new beginning.
Just needs a ribbon, huh?
Yep, and I'll even cut you a deal if you take it as is. Just not too attached to it, honestly.
Kimberly nods and considers the deal, exhilarated.
I'll take it.
Kimberly squeals, lightly clapping her hands together. She feels an explosion of joy inside her. A much-needed release. Vintage typewriter ribbons, she found, only cost a few dollars at her local office supply store. She hoped to arrive home to an empty apartment. But as always, when she unlocked and opened the door, she found Michael sprawled out on the couch in front of the TV, drinking a beer. He glanced lazily and apprehensively in her direction, noticing she was struggling with a large object. Relinquishing the half-empty beer bottle to the coffee table in front of him, he rose from his seat and made his way to the doorway.
No, I got it, Michael,
Kimberly said without looking at him. She lugged the typewriter into their bedroom and set it carefully on the desk in the far corner. Michael trailed her into the room, accompanied by his beer.
Where'd you get that?
He asked, confused. Tipping the mouth of the bottle up against his lips, he gulped loudly.
Found it at a thrift store in town. Just fell in love with it, I guess.
Yeah, it's cool. Does it work?
Michael was becoming increasingly both interested and intoxicated. He saunters over to the desk to inspect it. Kimberly tried to wave him away from it.
I have to replace the ribbon, but yeah, the guy said it should work.
The couple stood in silence over the typewriter, bonding over it in hopes of avoiding the glaring issue between them. Michael breaks the tension and resigns himself to the living room.
Well, I'll be watching TV if you need me.
And without another word, he disappears from the room. Kimberly's indifference was beginning to concern her. How could she feel so little for someone she gave up everything for? She sat in front of the typewriter and carefully replaced the black ink ribbon. An event flyer left on the desk served well enough as a test sheet of paper. She fed it through slowly, admiring the smooth turn of the knobs. She started to look more closely at the details of the typewriter. Its heft was warranted, it was well crafted and made of sturdy metal parts. It was something out of a black and white romance movie. It could be recognized anywhere by anyone who's ever owned it before. She knew she could never mistake it. As her fingers touched the cupped keys, they felt cool and strangely inviting. Everything was at the perfect setting. The entire instrument felt as if it were made for her. She began typing, enjoying the percussive sound of the letters being punched into the paper by the type bars. It was like tinkling rain or the skittering of pebbles near a pond. They tickled her brain in a way she'd never known. She wasn't a typist by any means, but she could spell her name quite well, one letter at a time. Kimberly repositioned the flyer paper and her posture. She punched in the letters of her name, focused on her finger placement. Pleased that she made it through without a mistake, she glanced up at the paper to appreciate her work. Jonathan, it read. Kimberly balked. She created a new line using the lever and started typing again, even more slowly and carefully. Kimberly, she typed. She looked up and again saw a second line filled with that unfamiliar name, Jonathan. Something must be wrong with the keys. They must have been placed in the wrong position when it was last restored. She types the name Jonathan. Apprehensively, she looks up. Jonathan, it reads.
Who's Jonathan?
A crackling voice spills past her ears from behind. Michael had been standing over her shoulder, watching her retype the same name over and over.
God, you scared me, Michael.
Kimberly sputters, clutching her chest.
Who's Jonathan, though?
Michael asks again, placing his beer bottle on the desk.
You've been typing on this thing for like 2 hours.
2 hours? Really, Michael?
Kimberly mocks sarcastically. She double takes the time on the alarm clock. 2 hours had indeed passed since she had first sat down. It was nearly midnight. She turns back toward the paper, loaded with the same name typed more than Kimberly can account for. She's aghast. When did all of this happen? She had only written it a few times.
I don't know. The keys are weird. They're not in the right spots.
What do you mean?
Michael asks flatly, making an attempt to oblige her.
Well, just type on it. Type your name and you'll see.
Kimberly gets up and offers him the desk chair, but Michael simply leans over it to reach the keyboard. He begins to type his name. Kimberly watches closely as each letter struck on the keyboard matches what the hammering metal sticks imprint on the flyer. It clearly spells out Michael. Kimberly shakes her head and says,
I don't get it.
No, wait, let me try again.
Michael creates a new line on the paper. He pecks into the keyboard again, verbally sounding out his name with a mischievous smirk. Kimberly checks again. It reads, handsome. Michael appears shocked but is smiling.
You're right. There's something weird going on with this thing.
He types another line on the paper. This time it reads, amazing.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
Kimberly says, trying not to satisfy him with a laugh.
No problem, doll.
He smirks and she winces. Kimberly hadn't heard that name in a while. He'd always called her doll, but now she'd be lucky to get a good morning or good night. Michael returns to the couch to catch the end of the show he was watching, most likely passing out in the process. Kimberly abandoned the mystery of the magic typewriter for the night, but its initial impression of grandeur has now transformed into an unsettling mystique. That night, her dreams became laborious and frightening. She sprung awake into the late morning. She sweeps Michael's side of the bed with her arm, but he isn't there. He must have already left for work. An object caught her eye in the corner of the room. It was the typewriter. Unaccustomed to its looming presence, it startled her. While drying off in the bedroom after her shower, something else caught her eye, a pile of paper stacked neatly next to the typewriter. She slunk over to it. Something was written on the top sheet. For Jonathan, it read. It was in Michael's handwriting. Kimberly smiled and shook her head in a bid to thwart his prevailing charm. The typewriter occupied her mind her entire shift at work. She could barely focus on anything else. All she wanted to do was load a fresh sheet of paper into the antique and hear those wonderful taps as ink is pressed into it. She couldn't wait to twist the golden knobs and adjust the feeder. Was it in the right spot for perfect typing, she wondered. Should she move it away from the window? All these questions raced in her mind, stopping short of guessing if it would be hungry by the time she got home. Above all, she was determined to print her name, to stake her claim to the typewriter. It was finally quitting time. She skipped her usual tear-filled post-work decompression time while sitting inside her car in the desolate parking lot and sped home to enjoy her new purchase, eager to overtake it from this mysterious Jonathan. Kimberly exploded into the home, likely the least concerned with the whereabouts of her live-in boyfriend than she's ever been. But miraculously, she was alone and had the apartment to herself. Forgoing the usual microwave dinner, she sits herself in front of the patiently waiting typewriter. Something inside of her feared it may have disappeared from the desk while she was gone, but it was just as she had left it. Fervently, she fed a fresh sheet of paper into its grasp. Lined up dead center of the page, she thought she'd start with her name again.
Type.
She heard in her ear as plain as day. She spun around in her chair, expecting to find Michael standing behind her again. But there was no one. The voice was cold but burned her psyche, and the sound was neither in the room with her nor inside her head. After the full-body chill wore off, her focus was pulled back to the typewriter. She whispered out loud to herself,
Kimberly, come on, my name is Kimberly.
She rested her fingertips gently on the keys and typed out her name. She looked up hopefully at the paper, and an angry panic struck her heart as it read out neatly, Jonathan. In her fury, her fingers slipped and struck the comma, and her hand lightly tapped the carriage return lever, creating a new line. She felt the tendons squeeze in both of her wrists, causing her to tap random keys on the keyboard. She felt as if she had swallowed a burning coal. She felt as if betrayal in her life seemed to never be in short supply. She leaned in towards the typewriter as her fingers lunged at the keys, her scorned thoughts drifting in between the liminal spaces of her life and everything that brought her so much pain and anguish. Could she have nothing of her own? Through the fog of memories and fear, Kimberly's thoughts became more vague and eventually were no longer her own. She saw flashes of places she'd never been and times she's never known. Her mind began to meld with another consciousness. She imagined herself in a dark hall in a sprawling mansion, where elegantly dressed men and women smiled and jeered loudly. Suddenly, in her unwinding hallucinations, she steps in front of a great but hazy mirror, and in it sees an unfocused reflection of someone who she knew had to be Jonathan. He was formless at first, but eventually a face started to form in the center of his head. It was grimacing as if it were desperate for release. A shared emotion overtook her. He was trapped somewhere and has been there for ages. He hasn't drawn a breath or slept a second since he was taken to this place. Kimberly focused on him until lips manifested, which started to part rhythmically. It was mouthing something. She could slowly but surely make out teeth and a tongue. Although she couldn't hear the words, it looked like he was saying her name.
Kimberly!
Kimberly's shoulder seized up under the grip of a large, icy hand.
Oh, sorry, doll. Didn't mean to scare you. You didn't hear me calling you?
Michael set down his cold beer on the desk. Kimberly huffed as she crawled out of her trance-like state.
Wow, look at all that. You writing a story or something?
Still groggy from the experience, Kimberly read along with him, just as perplexed and invested in what she had written. At first incoherent, something started to emerge from the mess of words. It read, "It is finished with me. Don't fall asleep." Michael asked, concerned.
What is this, Kim? You okay?
He patted her back lightly. Kimberly is just as bewildered, but she doesn't have the energy to argue with him in her state of mind.
I just need some sleep. But thanks for the paper, that was sweet.
Kimberly says meekly, abandoning the typewriting once again.
Yeah, no problem.
Michael responds, still unsure of Kim's headspace. But for the next 2 days, Kimberly can't sleep. When she's not at the typewriter recording the nonsense looping in her head, she's staring blankly ahead in the living room. Or standing at the window, gazing out over the snow-covered landscape of the city she felt she was held captive by. All she wanted was to see her name typed through the typewriter. What was the trick, she wondered. She pored over its physical details when she couldn't think of anything else to write. She couldn't keep the words out of her mind. Don't fall asleep. As her head dipped toward her chest while sitting on the couch, she waned in and out of the dream world. She would see flashes of who she came to understand was Jonathan, an entity that seemed to inhabit her entire being now. Sometimes she'd see him as her own reflection in windows and mirrors. She felt bound to him in the least endearing way. He was always in the back of her mind, staring eyelessly at her. Sometimes he would be tenderly swinging a lit cigar between his fingers. All she wanted to do was sleep. Michael finally convinced her to rest her eyes on the couch. She fell immediately into a deep slumber, despite her fight against it. As the dream world absorbed her, Jonathan came to her, fully formed and in the flesh, sitting in her desk chair in the center of a glossy black room. His tailored suit and dazzling cufflinks told a different story from his bankrupt eyes and soured frown. Smoke from his unashed cigar wafted towards Kimberly. Though she was standing still before him, he seemed to be silently sliding closer to her, encroaching on her space. His jaw loosened, and without moving his now open mouth, 2 words emitted from it.
It's time.
It was nearly 3 a.m. when she woke up. Not a soul was stirring in the apartment. Her head ached, but she was able to finally think clearly. Out of routine, she returned to her desk in the bedroom. The typewriter, which she had spent the past week obsessing over, was gone. Kimberly grunted, ripping clothes and pillows from the edge of chairs and furniture to check underneath them. She checked the closets, the food pantry, the bathroom, and finally underneath the bed. Michael, who was sleeping soundly in bed, was finally roused by the ruckus.
What are you doing? It's 3 in the morning.
Where is it? Where is he?
Kimberly snapped at him, flipping on the bedroom light.
Who?
Michael said, confused.
The typewriter. Where is it?
Kimberly barked. Michael sighed deeply and propped himself up on the bed, adjusting to the blinding overhead light.
Look, we need to talk about that thing. I don't know what's going on with you, but this isn't healthy. Just tell me what's wrong.
Nothing is wrong. I just need to know where it is, right now.
Michael finally says gingerly.
I had a friend take a look at it, just to find out where it came from. Thought you might like to know.
Michael offers a weak smile, realizing he may have just made the biggest mistake of the year 2000.
Where is it?
Kimberly's words were like embers threatening to become a great fire.
I have it in my car.
Michael assures her swiftly. Kimberly tears out of the room and through their apartment door. Barefoot and without a coat in the dead of the winter night, she treads through the snowy parking lot and retrieves her beloved typewriter from the back seat of Michael's car. As she re-entered her apartment, she immediately felt the pressure that was building behind her eyes release. She sets the typewriter on the kitchen counter and allows her body to rewarm. Michael creeps into the kitchen and stands before her, pain and desperation in his face. He looks over the deep and dark bags under her eyes and her thinning frame. She can barely look at him.
So what did your friend say anyway?
Kimberly asks sarcastically, still catching her breath.
He said it's fake. Like, it's not a real typewriter, at least not one he's ever seen. It's a combination of different types and models of a typewriter, but it's just like a movie prop or something. He's not sure when or where it was made.
Michael slips his hands in the pockets of his pajama pants and offers more eye contact than they've shared in months.
So, what does it matter?
Kimberly asks with her hands on her hips. Michael shrugs.
I don't know. I just wanted to know if it was safe to use. It seemed like it was becoming detrimental to your health. Don't you think?
I think you crossed the line by taking it out of this apartment like that. Taking it away from me. Why can't I have just this one thing and I'm fine, obviously?
Michael never thought he'd ever look back fondly on the relationship they had just a week ago. He's astounded by how far they've fallen away from each other.
I'm sorry, doll. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I want to help you. I just don't know how.
Michael apologized. And in his heart, it wasn't just for taking the typewriter. It was for everything he did and everything he could never do. Kimberly nods and breaks the mutual gaze, now peering down at the contraption that was on the verge of ruining her life. She lifts it carefully and proceeds to the bedroom to return it to its rightful place.
He also said that it was probably owned by someone super rich.
Michael says as she passes him.
What rich person?
Kimberly says impatiently as she stops in the hall.
Yeah, there's some sort of auction marker on the bottom. Some kind of black market thing. Guess the last owner of that thing was into some dark stuff.
You're making that up.
Kimberly half laughs. Michael shrugged.
Good night.
Kim said, rolling her eyes. Michael calls to her.
Night, doll. I love you.
She shuts the door, and he takes the hint. He nestles into the couch and prepares for another uncomfortable night's sleep. The typewriter was finally back in its place. A fresh sheet of paper was inserted by the shell of a human that used to resemble Kimberly. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her fingertips on the keys, where they belonged, as far as she was concerned. And just like a hypnotist, the typewriter pulled her into a trance through the soft ticking of the keys. She felt herself slipping away like a star falling from the sky, quietly as seen from afar but burning violently up close. She could have sworn the keys were moving on their own now. Kimberly had just enough energy to type one last sentence. And then, all at once, her swirling thoughts were a void. Stark silence, illustriously paired with blackness. All but a small sliver of consciousness remained. A sliver she had to fight to hold on to. All she wanted was to rest. But something in her felt that if she gave in to sleep again, she would never return. She was roiled in the delicate panic of losing her grip on her life. The one with a dead-end job and daily sob sessions. The one she built with a man who could never fully give himself to her, nor she to him. And yet she would do anything to hold on to it, as well as the hope that's kept her going, even now. Her body started to resist the urge to stay awake, against her greatest will. And then, there was nothing. The next morning, Michael got up and stretched, starting a coffee pot for 2 in the kitchen. He felt the urge to check on Kimberly. He quietly turned the doorknob and peeked in. She wasn't in bed, but he could hear the mindless typing he had eerily grown attached to, coming from the corner of the room, and he could still smell her sweet, natural scent. She must be at the desk. He swung the door open a bit more to confirm his suspicion, but to his surprise, she wasn't at her desk either. She must have already left for work. He had run out of patience over the typewriter, and he intended to get rid of it once and for all while she wasn't virtually connected to it. He approached the machine angrily, but was stopped, dead in his tracks, when he saw what was typed on the page. It read,
Kimberly,